I am a former Army interrogator, human intelligence collector. I was trained by the United States government to analyze your language, body language, posture to identify deception. I did it in the real world through interrogations, through source operations, and through strategic debriefings. I've got tons of certifications. I'm an expert at this.
You guys get ready to leave out of there, getting towed out.
Yeah.
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, Nolan was, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
Last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. That is critically important information. All right, right here, he's talking about when his buddy Bart pulls out his buddy Wyatt's boat. So Bart is on one boat and he's pulling out Wyatt's boat. Wyatt's boat is the one that you've heard about was taken on water and sinking, and that's why they had to leave Horn Island. I want you to pay attention to this.
To where we're out of all this, all this chaos, because we left at 4:30 and there was still.
We left at 4:30. We left at 4:30. This guy just said that the last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. Very specific time. Now, how did he know it was 3 o'clock? Brandon Tatum didn't ask him that. If this was an interrogation, that's a key question I would ask. How do you know it was 3 o'clock?
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, Nolan was, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
And Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. Katie.
That's Katie McCormick that he's talking about. Katie McCormick said that's not true, but let's listen. This is at 3 o'clock. This happened at 3 o'clock.
And Nolan was sitting there, and the last time I saw him, I looked at Nolan, and Nolan was like shaking his head, laughing. That was the last time I laid eyes on him. But when we were leaving,
when we were leaving, so it would be 4:30 because he's already said we were leaving at 4:30.
Nolan was sitting by the boat.
Nolan was sitting by the boat. How do you know, Warren, that Nolan was sitting by the boat? The last time you laid eyes on him was at 3 o'clock. It's now 4:30. This is your timeline. Timeline is everything. At this part of the story, he's at 4:30. But he just said less than a minute ago, 2 minutes ago, that the last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and
how do you know that? The last time you laid eyes, your exact words, on him was 3 o'clock. You're now talking about 4:30. Now listen what happens next.
My buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving.
Now, in the interest of honest analysis here, if they were both on the boat and he heard his buddy yelling at Nolan, not him, by the way. Warren wasn't yelling at Nolan. Even in his own story, he wasn't looking for Nolan or yelling for Nolan. And in the beginning of part 1 of the interview, he says, Nolan was like a brother to me. He was my best friend. More than a friend, though. He was like a brother to me. But Warren's not the one looking for Nolan, not the one yelling for Nolan. He don't even go over and lay eyes on him again, according to his own story that he's telling us. But he hears his buddy saying, hey, Nolan.
The boat's having issues. And no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat. Get on the boat. And Nolan said, no, I'm staying out here. I'm going to ride in with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear. It's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get.
So your buddy asked Nolan multiple times and you never did. Your brother, your best friend. But notice he didn't say Nolan said, I'm going to stay here with Katie who I'm sitting with next to the boat. No part of that exchange would have given Warren the details to know that Nolan was sitting by the boat with Katie, which was his exact words. He contradicted himself. That's blatant deception. It needs to be immediately exploited and interrogated.
Well, we actually have proof that Grandpa Jerry was actually on Horns Island as well, which makes sense why he was able to call the captain because he physically was watching. And now who was Wyatt on the phone with? Well, we know he was on the phone with Cito Call, but let me show you Grandpa Jerry.
White-haired old man. Look, I just want you.
And she also gave us a little specialty on Wyatt. And Now, I thank her for that treat because we all been asking the same question. Where is Wyatt? Why haven't we heard from Wyatt? Where are his boats that one we know was missing from the MDMR report? We just have no information, no nothing on him. He is seemingly is in the dark, like he's just disappeared somewhere. So where is he? And why haven't we heard from him? Just asking. My opinions, just asking. And thank you, Miss Trina. Thank you, Queen. I appreciate you.
Listen to people when they talk, because if they are guilty, they will tell on themselves. A guilty conscience will tell on itself. You cannot tell me otherwise. I watched the press conference with Nolan Wells' parents. The dad said he went to go pick up his son's car that was left at his friend's house. When he got there, he said, "Hey, I'm Nolan's dad. I'm here for the keys so I can drive his car home." The boy said Nolan was like a brother to me. The dad said, well, if he was like a brother to you, help me. Go get his keys, this, that, and the third.
And I said, look, I'm Nolan's father. I'm here to get his keys so I can get his car. I said, he's like,
his car was in the yard.
His car's parked in the yard. So he was like, I don't know, man. Nolan's like my brother. I said, well, if Nolan was like your brother, would you please go in your room and see if you can find my son's keys so I can take his car home? He walks off, 2 or 3 minutes, come back. I can't find the keys. I said, okay. So at that point, I get the boys and I move them out the house because I didn't want them to go into the house and start tearing up these people's houses because then that would be a whole other situation. So we walk outside by the car. One of the guys that was in the house with us, he was on the phone with a girl, and the girl told him that Nolan's keys were on top of this Jack's guy's Xbox in the house because apparently she was there with him earlier. So he goes back up to the door by himself, and 5 minutes later, the keys come out. So now I feel like you done lied to me. So now I'm really like in distress with you.
Why are we using past tense? Why is it that when I'm coming to pick up my son's shit, the first thing you say to me is Nolan was like a brother to me? If I left my friend at the island and they were alive, I'm not thinking, like, I'm not using past tense. You could say I'm reading too much into it. You could say it's not that deep, but it is. That's why y'all be getting finessed. That's why y'all be letting people lie to y'all. That's why y'all can never figure shit out, because you do not listen to people when they talk. If I left my friend and my friend was alive, I'm thinking that they still alive. I'm not going to be like, oh, so-and-so was like a sister to me, or so-and-so was like a brother to me. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, do I have to over-explain myself? So that was red flag number 1, first of all. So the boy goes to look for the keys, come back, say he can't find the keys. Somebody else was on the phone with a girl. The girl said the keys is on the Xbox. He goes back in the house, comes back with the keys. You didn't see them keys the first time when you went in there? You didn't look on the Xbox? I'm pretty sure your Xbox is in front of your TV, or under the little, TV thing, or by the TV, or whatever it is. You didn't see them keys? No, because you wasn't looking. You wasn't looking. How did somebody else on the phone know where the damn keys is at? And they not even there. But you missed it when you went in the room. What? Okay, whatever. Then the father says that if he had a boat, he would have been looking for his son that night, but he did not have access to a boat. He does not own a boat, and he does not have friends that have boats. The coach had to offer help to go look for the son, and they went the next day at 5 o'clock that morning. I'm gonna add the video to this. So you're not offering to go help look for your friend. If you left your friend and your friend was alive, like I wouldn't leave my friend, but hypothetically say I did, and now my friend is missing, and this shit done got out of hand. I'm like, oh my god, like I'm finna go help. Bitch, we went on a boat. We went there on a boat and came back on a boat. So clearly I got access to a boat. Again, do I have to over explain myself? I'm offering to go help. Oh shit, like my girl missing, or my dude missing. Let me go. Let's hop on a boat and let's go look for my friend. Why are we not offering help? Guilty people will tell on themselves. Guilty people will tell on themselves. Ain't nobody paying attention to this. Ain't nobody really comprehending it. And again, that's why everybody is so easily lied to, so easily persuaded. They go with the first thing people say because they is not listening to people when they talk. They are not watching. They are not paying attention to people's actions. Why? And another thing, why I gotta beg you for my son's shit? Why do you even have it to begin with? But why do I gotta beg you for it? They didn't offer to give the phone. The parents had to beg and plead for the damn phone for shit to be deleted out of it. Why are you not like, oh shit, this is the phone, let me go give it to, the parents, or let me go give it to, whatever. Why I gotta beg for it? Why I gotta beg for my son's keys? Why, you know what I mean? 1 + 1 is 2, and everybody getting 6, 7, 8, and 12, and I don't like that. I don't like that.
Now, we're also not going to skip over the fact that the timing was strategic in them putting out the interview of Warren Hudson, who is one of the boys who was on the boat that day with Nolan Wells, and just so happens to be the son or the stepson, whatever, of Judge Ashley Cole. It is no coincidence that on the day that Ben Crump announced that the independent autopsy results were going to be made available, that this interview came out. I also just want to point out that in Ashley Cole's original statement, she said that the reason she deactivated their social media was because we live in an age of clickbait. And so with that in mind, you decided that a day after Nolan Wells' funeral and a day before the independent autopsy results were released was a good time for you to put out an interview that is clickbaity. There was also another friend whose name is Lucas Avis, I believe. And according to him, Nolan Wells was so inebriated that he was slurring his words, which is ironic because Warren Hudson has the exact opposite account of what he saw from Nolan Wells that day. He said that he was fine. Now, again, let me remind you that Warren Hudson's mother, stepmother, whatever she is a judge. So she understands the importance of creating reasonable doubt in an investigation or a case like this, should it go to trial and criminal charges are brought up against her son, stepson, and his friends. The timing is not a coincidence.
One question has continued to surface around Nolan Wells, and on the surface, it sounds almost impossible to answer. If Nolan knew how to swim, how could drowning still be considered the leading working theory? Ben Crump has publicly challenged the drowning theory on precisely those grounds. His argument is straightforward. Nolan was an athlete, he was a capable swimmer, and in Crump's view, those facts make an accidental drowning difficult to accept without further explanation. It is a legitimate question, and it deserves to be examined carefully rather than brushed aside. But swimming well and surviving dangerous open water are two very different things. That distinction becomes especially important when the conditions surrounding Nolan's disappearance are considered. A person can be highly competent in a controlled swimming environment and still face overwhelming danger when confronted with strong currents, sudden changes in depth, darkness, exhaustion, or other unpredictable conditions. Treating swimming ability as automatic protection against drowning can reduce a complicated environmental question to something far too simple. Todd Terrell, president of the United Cajun Navy, personally participated in the search for Nolan, including piloting a seaplane over the area where Nolan was ultimately recovered. When speaking with Nancy Grace, Terrell described that particular stretch of coastline in unusually specific terms. According to his account, the seafloor can change dramatically, going from roughly 2 or 3 feet deep to around 20 feet within only a few steps. He also described powerful rip currents in the area and said it was not unusual for a body to eventually wash ashore at that location. That matters because Terrell was not describing Nolan's abilities, he was describing the environment itself. And that creates an important distinction when evaluating Crump's argument fairly. Strong swimmers can still become victims of rip currents or sudden drop-offs because those hazards do not measure how well someone performs in a swimming pool. They test whether a person can recognize and escape rapidly changing conditions that may overwhelm even experienced swimmers. The risk may be lower for someone who is a strong swimmer, but lower risk is not the same thing as no risk. That is particularly relevant here because the danger associated with this stretch of water has been described by people with knowledge of the area, rather than existing only as a theory connected to Nolan's friends or the competing narratives surrounding the case. None of that makes Crump's skepticism unreasonable. Nolan's family's legal and forensic team is continuing to examine the circumstances surrounding how his body ended up near the area where he was last seen. Their work could potentially raise questions that the current evidence does not answer. But Nolan being a strong swimmer, by itself, cannot conclusively eliminate accidental drowning as a possibility given what has been reported about the surrounding water. And then there is another piece of the investigation that has received considerably less attention. It involves Bart Edmonston and his cooperation with investigators. PBS reporting states that Edmonston, the 21-year-old who is operating another boat and briefly assisted with the malfunctioning vessel before declining to continue towing it, cooperated with law enforcement. He reportedly provided investigators with names of potential witnesses and permitted authorities to inspect his boat, including its GPS equipment. That detail is significant precisely because it does not fit neatly into either side of the public debate. It does not automatically support the idea that Nolan's friends were concealing something. But it also does not belong to the more adversarial narrative that has dominated so much of the online discussion surrounding this case. What it does provide is something investigators can actually examine. Allowing law enforcement access to a vessel and its GPS records gives authorities the opportunity to compare physical data against witness statements, timelines, and everything else collected during the investigation. Unlike a disputed audio recording or conflicting interpretation of a witness account, those records can potentially be checked against other evidence. And if investigators have already examined Edmonston's boat and GPS data, then another piece of the physical record exists outside the world of social media speculation. That is exactly why these two issues need to be considered together. Nolan's swimming ability raises a legitimate question. The dangerous conditions described in the search area provide one possible answer. Edmonston's cooperation provides another reminder that the investigation contains physical evidence that can be independently tested. And ultimately, that is where the difference lies between asking what might have happened and determining what the evidence can actually prove. Real skepticism does not require treating every person connected to a case as suspicious. Crump's argument about Nolan's swimming ability should be examined on its actual merits and measured against the documented conditions in the precise area where Nolan was recovered. It should not be accepted simply because it feels persuasive, but neither should it be rejected because it comes from someone representing Nolan's family and therefore has an established position in the case. The same standard applies to Edmonston, but from the opposite direction. His cooperation is a meaningful fact that leans toward good faith, and it should be recognized as such without turning it into something it cannot prove. Allowing investigators to examine your boat and equipment is evidence of cooperation. It does not, by itself, establish what happened to Nolan after Edmonston's boat departed the island. What it does mean is that another piece of potentially important physical evidence is available to investigators. You can compare it with the rest of the case. And that principle becomes increasingly important as this investigation moves forward. Two claims are emerging from very different sides of the case, and both deserve the same disciplined approach. One argument focuses on Nolan himself. If he was an experienced athlete and capable swimmer, how much weight should that carry when evaluating a drowning theory? The other focuses on the environment. If the exact location contained documented hazards such as sudden depth changes and strong currents, how much protection does swimming ability actually provide when someone is caught in those conditions? Those positions are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Both can be considered seriously at the same time. Neither proves the final answer by itself, and neither should be allowed to become a substitute for evidence. There is another development that brings this question back into even sharper focus. As discussed earlier in this series, Crump's team has continued working with Oceanic Engineering. Representatives connected to Nolan's family and representatives connected to the friend group have both moved beyond public objections and pursued formal legal remedies against people accused of spreading damaging or unverified claims. So when people ask whether anyone is actually doing anything about misinformation surrounding this investigation, there is a concrete answer. Yes, legal action has been initiated from more than one side. And that matters, because this case has existed inside an information environment where anonymous accounts, partial claims, misidentified material, and rapidly repeated theories have often traveled faster than investigators could verify them. For weeks and then months, online discussion frequently blurred the line between an allegation and an established fact. Now, at least in some instances, those allegations are moving into a system where claims can be formally challenged and evidence can be examined. That does not mean every lawsuit proves that a particular online claim was false. It does not establish liability before a court rules, and it certainly does not resolve the mystery surrounding Nolan's death. But the existence of these legal disputes does reveal something important about the information landscape surrounding this case. People on very different sides of the story are now saying that inaccurate public claims have crossed a line serious enough to warrant formal legal action. And that raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the biggest problem facing this investigation is no longer simply the absence of information, but the sheer volume of information that cannot be trusted? There is another related criticism that deserves to be addressed, because it has repeatedly followed the public discussion surrounding this case. Trump has spoken directly about a version of that criticism. and the question concerns his own role in what has unfolded. It is a fair question, and understanding the answer requires separating what he actually did from what people online have assumed he did. The question is whether his continued public involvement has also contributed, intentionally or not, to the surge of online harassment and targeting that has surrounded this case. His answer was straightforward. He rejected the idea that his advocacy was responsible for that behavior, pointing out that Nolan's parents themselves became targets of online attacks, despite having no established public platform before their son's death. He also repeated the position he has maintained throughout the case. The goal is not to accuse everyone involved, but to find out what happened. That distinction deserves to be examined honestly. Christine and Elmore were subjected to online harassment independently of anything Crump may have said or done. There is no obvious reason that grieving parents asking questions about their son's death should become targets of abuse simply because they want answers. Yet that is what happened. At the same time, national-level advocacy inevitably brings additional attention to a case. Greater exposure can amplify everything surrounding a story: the legitimate questions, the public support, the criticism, and unfortunately, the harassment as well. Those realities can exist simultaneously. One does not automatically cancel out the other. There is also another technical detail from the Washington Informer's reporting that deserves attention because it connects directly to the timeline investigators have been examining. Officials have identified what has been described as a material gap in the account of Nolan's disappearance from Horn Island. That wording matters, but it also needs to be handled carefully. The phrase does not by itself reveal what occurred inside that gap. It does not establish that a crime happened there. It simply identifies a portion of the timeline where investigators do not yet have a complete evidentiary picture. That corresponds with the disputed period already examined throughout this series, the stretch beginning around 4:30 p.m. and extending toward approximately 6 p.m., when reliable, verified information about Nolan's movements becomes increasingly limited. When investigators themselves describe that portion of the timeline as a material gap, it suggests the issue is more significant than a simple paperwork error or minor chronological discrepancy. It is an acknowledged weakness in the existing record. And notably, the United Cajun Navy's own reconstruction of the timeline encountered essentially the same unresolved period independently. Officials have also continued to emphasize another limitation: no official toxicology report has been publicly released. Their guidance has remained consistent. While the investigation is active, the public should distinguish verified information from speculation and rely on information that can actually be confirmed. After 2 months of competing theories, that may be the most frustrating conclusion of all. There is a legitimate technical dispute over whether Nolan's swimming ability meaningfully challenges an accidental drowning theory in an area where strong rip currents have been documented. There is documented cooperation involving Edmonston's boat and GPS equipment. There are now separate defamation efforts emerging from opposing sides of the broader controversy, and there is an officially acknowledged material gap in the timeline. But none of those developments, individually or collectively, has produced the breakthrough many people have been waiting for. So where does that leave the questions people actually want answered as the case enters its 9th week? Is the drowning theory being seriously tested against Nolan's known swimming ability? At this point, yes. Multiple parties are examining the question through witness accounts and specialized oceanographic analysis, but there is still no definitive conclusion. Has someone meaningfully cooperated with investigators? Yes. Edmonston's cooperation, including the reported inspection of his boat and GPS equipment, is documented. Is misinformation facing consequences? Yes. Separate legal actions have been pursued by representatives connected to different sides of the controversy. But has the investigation produced a definitive breakthrough? Not yet. What investigators have done, however, is formally identify something this series has been returning to for nearly 2 months: a material gap in the timeline surrounding Nolan Wells' final known hours. That gap remains unresolved. And it remains significant enough that the case is still moving toward a grand jury process that has yet to convene. That final point deserves more attention than it might initially appear to. After weeks of viral accusations, competing interpretations, legal filings, and disputed evidence, it can become easy to lose sight of what the official record actually says. But when investigators themselves use the term material gap, they are not necessarily describing an insignificant inconsistency. They are acknowledging that an important portion of the evidentiary timeline remains incomplete. Eventually, the missing pieces could come from phone forensics that are still being processed, from the oceanographic analysis now underway, from a witness whose information has not yet surfaced, or from evidence that ultimately provides no new answer at all. Right now, no one can say which of those possibilities will happen. What can be said is much narrower and much more important. The gap exists. Officials have acknowledged it. And until that portion of Nolan Wells' final hours is explained, one of the central questions in this case remains open.